They're all trying to eliminate Christianity because they see Christianity as the villain. Christianity is the means through which men have enslaved women, is the way that they articulate it. The first one is to have contempt for men. The second one is to be involved in the occult. And the third one is to be promiscuous. So it becomes like the woman who works at PETA, but she's aborting her own baby. And the socialists realized that if they made women angry, they would be more politically effective for them. And it works. Like, nobody wants to mess with an angry woman. This is why, women have gone from being kind of fierce mama bears and wanting to protect their children to using that same kind of ferocity. And they now are using to protect the right to kill their children through abortion. One is about pride and control. The other one is about service and humility. One is about the worship of self. The other one is the worship of God. And is about controlling women. The other one has been the greatest source of women's dignity in all of human history. One is about killing children. One's about raising children. They do not match up.
Women's lives aren't meant to be sterile abstractions to perform far-off mercies for strangers while exacting the perfect division of home labor with our spouses. They're meant to be messy and sublime, varied and banal, heartrending and elevating, awkward and awesome, textured and streamlined, contained and surrendered, all rooted in the concrete, the tedious, and the everyday. Hey guys, welcome back to With All Her Mind. I am Justice Keel, and I'm very excited for today's episode. We're not going to have our usual intro segments because we have a very special guest, and I think we should just get straight to it. But I wanted to give a little bit of background context as to why I wanted to have Dr. Carrie on the show. A lot of you will not be familiar with her work because she's a Catholic author. But don't let that scare you off. She's phenomenal. She is a mother in the faith, loves the Lord, a mother of 5 children, just a phenomenal source of wisdom for us today as women. And it's hard for me to even put into words personally the impact that Dr. Carrie has had on my life because it has been so integral to my understanding of what it even means philosophically and theologically to be a woman of God. And my mom and I, when I was engaged, were having a lot of conversations around this topic. And my mom was just really encouraging me to shift my attention and focus off of myself and onto being ready to serve my husband and to become a mom. And it was a really hard shift for me because for years I had been preparing to, in my mind, go be Miss Universe. And so I had been competing and I eventually won Miss Tennessee USA. And so during that whole time, I was very much in a girl boss, me focused, individualistic time in my life. And I needed a big shift. And so around that time, as my mom and I are having these conversations, I found Dr. Carrie's work and just wept as I was reading it because it was so much of the wisdom that my mom had been sharing to me, but in a different language, in a different way of saying these things and connecting to theology and connecting to philosophy and connecting even to our physiology. And it just, all of the bells were ringing, things were aligning for me. And so all of her work that I've read, and I've read the majority of her work at this point, has really, really impacted me. But what's really amazing, they say that you don't want to meet your heroes because you'll be disappointed. And so I was ready for that. I was ready to, just not have unrealistic expectations on her to be something other than a human. And I was just blown away because not only is Dr. Carrie creating resources that are so influential for a generation of women in helping us live out our call as women of God, but she is living it. She is feminine and warm and gracious and just embodies the feminine virtues so beautifully. I'm honestly still kind of processing it days later because I was so impacted by her not just writing amazing things, but embodying it in a way that was very inspirational. And, there are very few women in the world who have impacted me in that type of way. It's like my mother, my grandmother, a few others. And so I just want you guys to know how highly I think of her going into this, because I know sometimes as Protestants, we're like a little hesitant to learn from and be fed by Catholic believers. But I just want to reassure you that she is an excellent source for you to be drawing from. She's full of the fruit of the Spirit and just a love for the Lord that is really contagious to be around. And I know that you guys are going to love this interview today. I want to read her bio before we get into it, just so you guys can hear a little bit of her professional accolades, because it's pretty amazing. Dr. Carrie Gress is a scholar at the Institute for Human Ecology at Catholic University of America. She has a doctorate in philosophy from the Catholic University of America and is the editor at the online women's magazine Theology of Home. Her work has appeared in numerous publications, including, I'm only going to list a few of these because this list is phenomenally long. Daily Wire, Daily Caller, The Federalist, The Epoch Times, The Wall Street Journal, The Washington Examiner. She is a frequent radio and podcast guest and has appeared on Fox, BBC, CBC, EWTN, OAN, and Russia Times Television. Carrie has lived and worked professionally in Washington, D.C. and Rome, Italy, and her work has been translated into 9 languages. She is the author of several books, including The Ultimate Makeover, The Marian Option, Theology of Home, The Anti-Mary Exposed, The End of Woman, How Smashing the Patriarchy Has Destroyed Us, and her upcoming book, Something Wicked, Why Feminism Can't Be Fused with Christianity. And guys, I forgot to say, that's what today's interview is. We're talking about her new book that is coming out in January of 2026, Something Wicked. And you can look down below for connections to all her resources, all her things will be right down below. And guys, she's also a mother of 5. Okay, so on top of all of those amazing accolades, I know the one that she's probably the most proud of is her 5 kids. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this interview. Comment down below what you think, any questions or comments that you have, and we'll try to answer those in a future episode. Thanks so much for watching. I am so excited to have you on the show today. We're doing a couple different episodes, some not planned because we had some audio issues, but we're getting back in the saddle. For those who are not familiar with your work, we're going to have a Q&A episode that they can watch, and we'll go a little intro into kind of how you got into researching feminism and all of these things. But this interview also is standalone, so people who aren't familiar with your other work, I think that they'll definitely still get lots of wonderful things out of it. To be talking about your upcoming book, it's going to be out in January 2026, called Something Wicked, Why Feminism Can't Be Fused with Christianity. And this is a topic that a lot of people don't want to get into because, well, all the reasons that we're going to talk about today. And I think that you handle it with so much grace, but also you're graciously ruthless with the truth. And I just love that. So I'm really excited to dive into this book, into one of the major things that you talk about in Something Wicked is how feminism has become like a pseudo church in a way. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that I think is really important to cover first is so much of the time we are told the first wave of feminism was good, it was fine, it was a wholesome suffragettes, and they were, it went off the rails during the second wave. Yeah. And one of the interesting things that I learned through your work is that that's not the case. Yeah. So can you give us some of that history of the first wave and where the roots
What's going on?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, and this was something that I believed as well. I thought it's all the first wave is great. And, even right up until I wrote my last book, because that's when I really went back to the first wave and thought, I just need to check this. I bet I can get some great quotes from it, and I'll just move back on to sort of feminism in the 60s and after. And that's really where the problems were. So the reality is so much different. I think one of the things that we have in our minds is kind of anything that happened in the 1800s must have just been Victorian and pure and Christian and, exactly. And it's not that at all. It was really startling to me to start just digging into this and see, first of all, how much the roots of feminism coincide with the French Revolution and what the efforts of the French Revolution were, which was to get rid of anything traditional, get rid of the past, get rid of Christianity, make it a very rational society that meant more scientific. All of those pieces were embodied, I think, in feminism really from the beginning, because Mary Wollstonecraft is considered the grandmother of the movement. And she was formed by English men who considered themselves the revolutionary men. They were thrilled when the French Revolution started. And so there's a lot going on that doesn't coincide at all with the Christian vision. And I think sort of starting to parse that out is really important. The other thing that's really interesting is to sort of just see the messiness of certainly England, but also the United States during this stage. You've got so many huge changes going on. Socialism is on the rise. The Civil War happens. Abolition happens. There's just the aftermath of the Civil War alone is so messy because so many men were killed. And then, even some place like New York City, you've got something like 20,000 prostitutes alone in the city.
Wow.
Yeah. And
wow. I had no idea.
Yeah. And it's a mess. And actually, I just learned about Teddy Roosevelt, how he helped clean up New York City as part of, he was appointed to helping clean up the city. And he realized how many people were just being paid off even to get a job as a policeman. And all the policemen were getting paid off by the brothels. And anyway, it was just an incredible mess, just to kind of give you some kind of context. The other thing is you had good things going on where the Christian movements, people were trying to help the messiness. The abolition movement itself was obviously full force and very powerful. So, but the women's movement itself, and that's kind of the language that's used that era, it was called the women's movement. There's all these parts to it, but there were basically like 10 main women who were sort of the leaders of it. And in this book, Something Wicked, I end up talking about kind of the leadership and what is common among all these women. And most of them are following Mary Wollstonecraft. And Mary Wollstonecraft, she's an English woman. She comes from this very broken family, abusive father. But she finds kind of this intellectual home. It's really interesting. She's become sort of this protege of this man named Dr. Richard Price, who is considered the first leftist thinker in the West. And so Dr. Price ends up kind of taking her under his wing, and she also joins this group of men at the publisher's house. There's a man named Jay Johnson who publishes all of her work, and all of these radical men are kind of in and out. It's almost like the first think tank. They're all kind of working together. So in any event, they have a lot of very striking theological ideas, and one of them is the notion of Unitarianism sort of comes out during this period. And Unitarianism doesn't believe that Jesus is the Savior. They don't believe he's part of the Trinity. They don't believe in the Trinity. So he's just kind of this new model for life.
Sounds like a lot of people today.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
In kind of the woke Christian circles that are so popular right now.
Yeah, exactly. So in any event, this is the model that is created is this idea of Mary Wollstonecraft, this theological idea of Unitarianism, getting rid of the past, moving forward with rationality. I mean, it's very Enlightenment thinking, scientific knowledge, that those are the pieces. So you then transfer that to the United States, and you have all these women who are also Unitarians, most of whom have abandoned any kind of faith. Many were Baptists or Calvinists or Quakers. So they abandoned something more mainline, and they end up becoming either Unitarians or they're actually actively involved in occult. Whether there was this phenomenon going on at the time where people would basically be conjuring up spirits that would knock on tables that would give them answers to their questions, and then seances were common. So anyway, these are the women that, Elizabeth Cady Stanton's involved in this. Susan B. Anthony is involved in this. The major players that we think of, the Clarissa Mott's another one, exactly, that are involved in this women's movement. And from these ideas, you can see kind of this foundation happening. They're all trying to eliminate Christianity because they see Christianity as the villain. Christianity is the means through which men have enslaved women, is the way that they articulate it. And it's really wild to see them mapping on to slavery. They kind of have this audacious point of view where they can take themselves and say, well, women are just as enslaved as the slaves are.
Just insane.
Well, especially when you
wild claim.
Yeah, especially when you realize that most of these women are incredibly privileged, upper class women, that weren't out doing their own laundry.
Yeah.
So anyway, that I think it's when you start to really see what it is that they're doing, you realize that second wave feminism is not actually that far away. It's almost just the second phase of it's more of a progression of it. It just goes deeper into kind of socialist Marxist thought from thereafter.
I feel like the plant, the little bud that started growing in the first wave, it's like people's claim when they say that the second wave is when it went awry, is like saying that a different kind of fruit came from it's like an apple, the bud of an apple tree, and then it grew apples. And it's like, well, the fruit was where it went wrong. And I'm like, well, it came from that tree that makes apples.
Yeah.
So
no, that's such a great
it's a logical conclusion of it.
No, it's direct growth out of it because it's very godless. It's very focused on what, all the ideologies that come out of that period, whether it's socialism or communism and Marxism, that kind of focus on the individual and sterility.
Yeah.
So those are kind of the marks of it that start at the beginning.
And what's really interesting is like growing up, even in my conservative homeschool curriculum, when they talked about the suffrages, the suffrage movement, the suffragettes, and those are the big three names: is Lucretia Mott, Susan B. Anthony, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and they were painted to be these great godly Christian women who fought for our rights, and we can be really proud of how they came about their mission and everything. But I think I can't remember if this is part of my problem is I've read so much of your work that I mix it all together in my brain. So I can't remember if this was in The End of Woman or in Something Wicked, where you talk about even the occult connection to the Seneca Falls. Can you explain? I'm like going to butcher that. Can you explain it?
So Seneca Falls and the Declaration of Sentiments that Cady Stanton comes up with. This is sort of this women's manifesto that she develops. Even the ideas for those came from one of the spirit tables, and that spirit table is still in the Smithsonian today. You can go see this table where she got these ideas.
It's basically like a seance kind of.
Yeah, exactly. It's that kind of channeling spirits, and so that's where that starts. And then Susan B. Anthony was also started as Baptist, and then ends up actually proclaiming herself an atheist. And then there's another woman named Matilda Gage, who is really interesting because she gets left out of the story altogether, even though those three women were kind of the main core of the movement. And they also wrote this, I think it's a 6-volume history of feminism and the women's movement. But Matilda Gage was actually highly involved in witchcraft. And it is her son-in-law, whom she taught how to do seances, who wrote the book, The Wizard of Oz.
Yes, I remember reading this now.
Yeah.
I thought that was a wild connection.
It's totally wild. Exactly.
Yeah. This is not a slam on, some people love those books. But I always felt like something is weird here. Something is a little weird here.
Right. But you can see her influence. I mean, she was a firm believer in both good witchcraft and bad witchcraft. So what is, it's the good witch and the bad witch. And, it's really, even just the story of Baum describing how he came up with the idea shortly after her death. It's all very esoteric and a lot of occult elements going on there. So yeah, it's really interesting when you start digging into what these women were really trying to do, and these were not pious women. And there's a lot of pushback from people, both Protestants and Catholics at the time too, recognizing that this is really an effort to push women into becoming more masculine and to abandon the ideas of motherhood. Even Teddy Roosevelt, I found this great quote from Teddy Roosevelt talking about how it's those who are pushing women out of the understanding of the importance of motherhood. This isn't just something bad, but he actually calls it wicked.
Wow. One of the quotes from your book that I think is really, really telling about the fact that, these founding mothers of the women's movement, if you will, were not just godly Christian women, is this quote from Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And she says, "The only points in which I differ from all ecclesiastical teaching is that I do not believe that any man ever saw or talked with God. I do not believe that God inspired the Mosaic Code or told the historians what they say he did about women, for all the religions on the face of the earth degrade her, and so long as woman accepts the position that they assign her, her emancipation is impossible." So first, she basically disavows kind of what the most important thing you need to even get to the Lord, which is, Scripture, which is the revelation of God to us. And then she goes on to claim that Christianity denigrates women, which is so fascinating because we know
opposite.
that the Judeo-Christian tradition is like the first historical, group that, I don't even know what to call it, that establishes rights for women in many ways. And if you look at the Mosaic Code, that was like very, nobody else was saying that women even should have any rights, and the Mosaic Code gives that. So it's very fascinating that even, she's lauded as a godly Christian woman that we can be proud of in our history of the women's movement. And then when you get into it more, you're like, never mind.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting too, even in that quote, she says something to the effect of, women's emancipation. Like it's very clear. She's framing this as,
wow,
this is how we've been enslaved. And, it's really interesting to, like, as you were mentioning, just what Christianity in particular has done for women, because this is far more than paganism, which is sort of the alternative that's usually brought up, certainly in the occult. This is polygamy, and this is infanticide, and this is slavery, is actual sex slavery. These kinds of realities existed. And so to then somehow say that Christianity is the one that's really, we are enslaved and from which we can't be emancipated. It's really, remarkable, these kinds of claims that are being made.
And her using that word during that period of time where they are actually trying to fight for the emancipation, like the literal emancipation of human beings from slavery.
Right.
I didn't even think about the significance of that.
Yeah.
And also the tone deafness.
Well, and not only that, I mean, there also, we know that she was very racist. One of the reasons there were two groups focused on feminism and the women's vote was because she and Susan B. Anthony were upset that Black men got to vote before white women. And, so there were all these internal divisions and things that were going on simultaneously, most of which are largely unsavory today, that it's amazing that they're still lauded and given, the kind of respect that they are given a lot of these positions.
Yeah. A lot of these quotes have been buried, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, for sure.
So in your book, you describe the time period from 1900 to 1960 as the era of building the new woman. So who is the new woman?
Yeah. So the first, I would say from like 1790, which is Mary Wollstonecraft, when she publishes her main document. It was called a pamphlet, but it was really a book because it was quite long. The Vindications of Rights of Woman, to the 1900s, which is around the time period when Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton either lose their influence and then pass away eventually, without the vote happening. That is really an effort to sort of undermine and get rid of Christianity and start promoting this idea of women being enslaved and how do we, the real vision. And then the 1900s to 1963 really is when the second wave starts with Betty Friedan. This is a really interesting period that gets glossed over tremendously because the bulk of the weight goes on kind of the suffrage movement. But it was really influential because there were a group of women that were part of this club called the Heterodox Club, or Heterodoxy. And they got together that the only requirement was that you had to be heterodox in your beliefs in somehow. So they rejected Christianity, or some were lesbians, all kinds of just wild, interesting women. But they were the ones that actually defined what feminism was, the term. It was sort of like how, when woke was coming up, most of us were like, I don't even know what that means. Yeah. And then as time went on, it kind of became clearer to us, and we could start defining it and understand, really wrap our heads around it. And so that was really the stage that they were at, where it was like, this word had come from France. Let's use this and start like really marking off what we mean by this. And it was at that stage where you have this group of women basically saying, feminism is this idea of us living apart from raising children, our fertility, and even from men. Kind of this is really the idol of independence that comes up. That's what the focus is about. So you see this in someone like, Virginia Woolf, who wrote the book, A Room of Her Own. And she's saying, if we just have our own space and our own money, it's not going to take very long where we finally catch up with men, because creatively they've been way out in front of us because they've had these things and we haven't had these things. We've been raising children. So now we can finally catch up. And, of course, there's all kinds of issues with that. But this is really the footprint of, what feminism becomes. This is sort of the basement level of it in the 1900s. And Simone de Beauvoir, also in France, ends up kind of pushing the envelope even further with her book called The Second Sex. But by and large, the important thing to understand is this new woman isn't this manifestation of the great, amazing gifts that women have. It's a denigration of the maternal. It's saying maternity is not important. This is for the dim-witted or women who don't know any better. The real women are those who act like men. And not good men either, because promiscuity and monogamy, all those things get thrown out the window. Those are part of this vision. Is we want to be just like men and not good men. We want to be able to have, be sexual libertines and all of these kinds of other things. So anyway, that's really, where things are solidifying more clearly. And then the second wave happens in 1963 with the arrival of Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique. But that's a very long period to actually say, like, oh, there's nothing bad going on. When you start digging into it and realizing they're hugely problematic ideas that were really taking root. They were very avant-garde. They were very popular among the elite milieu. And so they made their way deeply into, I think, the consciousness of the culture.
And something interesting about all of these women that I noticed in your writing is almost every single one of them had a really dysfunctional and even abusive family life growing up. Yeah. From Mary Wollstonecraft all the way to Gloria Steinem. You just look at them and it's like tragedy, it's tragic story after tragic story after tragic story.
Right.
And it seems like that those primal wounds really set the stage in each of these women's lives for them to accept the dysfunctional form of life that feminism presents.
Yeah. No, and that I focused on a lot in The End of Woman, but I think it's such an important piece of it, because feminism is really the idea that we can live without God. How do we live? It's like a cocoon. How do we protect ourselves from these wounds, either from our families that have been inflicted on us? And that's a very clear pattern among these women. But then how do we sort of create a family? And this is where the idea of the sisterhood comes in, is just instead of having a real family, we're going to kind of protect ourselves with this idea of the sisterhood that we're supposed to, is supposed to help us. But fundamentally, the issue is really the integration of work and love and being loved. I think those are kind of the primal points in the midst of the different abuse from fathers who are alcoholics or philanderers or spendthrifts or whatever the issues were within the family units. And then how do these women protect themselves against these vulnerabilities? And so rather than saying, okay, we need to do a better job of helping men be better men or women be better women or families be stronger, their objective is let's just get rid of all of it.
Yeah.
And that's what's, I think,
burn
really
it all down.
right. And then we're somehow impermeable to it. You know, we're not vulnerable because we don't have to bear children. We don't have to be in relationship with people in a way that's messy. So
there's no more interdependence at all.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
That's so sad. Okay. And I know we're going to get into that more in a minute, but I want to talk about there's a specific story, but the impact that media has had even on forming our ideas about womanhood. And specifically, I want to talk about Wonder Woman, which is not like a major point of your book at all. It's kind of like a side story that you share in there. But I was really impacted by Wonder Woman, the new film that came out whenever, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 years ago.
With Gal Gadot.
Yes, Gal Gadot. And I just remember thinking, like, this is the empowered woman. This is the image of the empowered woman, because we just need to be educated enough, because she's really well read. She's like read every book. I don't know. I think she's supposed to be like ageless or something. So she's had time to read like philosophy and history of all that's ever existed. And she talks about how they don't need men. They figured out how to procreate without men. And then she's got all these martial arts moves. And so she can also like physically out compete with a man. And even like, I think she ends up saving the guy in the movie. And that appealed to me so much at the time. I'm embarrassed actually, but like I cried. I was like, yes, this is like, I put her on my vision board.
Wow.
I was in my full girl boss era. So what you wrote about some of the origins of the Wonder Woman story was super interesting to me. Can you share that?
Yeah. So there was a story called Her Land that was actually written by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, who was one of these heterodoxy women, club women. And Perkins Gilman also very sadly ended up, not only she abandoned her daughter, actually, is that I think she and her husband divorced, and then she sent her daughter away with her husband and the new wife or something. Anyway, I don't know the details, but it was one of the, I don't remember the exact details, but I remember it was one of those situations that the daughter, even into her 90s, still talked about how devastating this was for her mother to have abandoned her for her own purposes, to live her own life. So she ends up writing this book called Her Land, and this is what Wonder Woman comes from. And it's a story about, I think it's two men who are either on a boat or a plane, I can't remember which, and they end up crashing into this place where it's all these women, there's no men, and they're terribly advanced because there have been no men to stymie their culture. They have not. And their personalities are so ordered and developed, and they're all peaceful and brilliant. And I mean, it's amazing, especially if you've ever spent a large amount of time with groups of women. Like, it's just ridiculous.
Not how it goes.
It doesn't go that way at all. So from that story is really where Wonder Woman came from. And then one of the illustrators of it was another member of the heterodoxy group as well. So but it's just this idea, I mean, this is the myth that I think that has been, we've been sold, is that we can we can have it all. We can have the physical strength of men to compete with men. We can, the independence. And part of that is really this idea too of wanting to do good. I mean, I think this is the really big challenge that is hard for us to sort of understand, is there's that deep desire in the heart of women to want to do good. But we've just been sent off in all these different trajectories that are actually, confusing things instead of really helping us understand how is it we ultimately do the good. And, we can talk about that more later, but I think it's important to use Wonder Woman as kind of a touchstone to understand like where we got off the path. And, Wonder Woman is autonomous other than her sisterhood as well. She doesn't need men to procreate. There's no use for them. And that's what feminism tells women, is we have no use for them. And we see this also in men because they feel it as well. We have no use for you. And that is really where, the despair comes in, because all of us need to have meaning and purpose and focus. And if it's not there, then we're seeing clearly what happens.
Yeah.
We'll find other distractions.
Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting that the image of like this, in many ways, that is like what they're trying to create with the new woman. But there is not an actual example because it's impossible. And so they have to create like a mythological world because there will never be a real life example of that because that's not what happens. Even like scientifically and biologically, our understanding of women and how we work in communities, it's not like that.
And that's such a great point too, because this is one of the things that even the early women's movement understood was you have to go back and retell the origin story. So this is sort of an origin story, using myth, and it's very compelling storytelling. But this was, even Genesis had to be rewritten by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and they had to rework it and help like make it so that Eve actually got some knowledge from the serpent instead of it being the case that this was a temptation and a failure and a fall. So all of these things have to be shifted in terms of storytelling and trying to make women and men think, totally differently about Christianity.
That's so fascinating. And even the fact that, when I watched Wonder Woman, I did not understand like physiology enough. And I watched a podcast from a man who was in the military for many years. And he was trying to help women be prepared. He was like, you are vulnerable physically, and you're watching movies like Wonder Woman and Catwoman, whatever, all the other iterations of the same story over and over again, thinking that if you just learn the right martial arts moves and if you just, work out enough, you're going to be able to protect yourself in this world. And he's like, you need
reality.
You need reality because that's actually dangerous for you to go around thinking that, because you need to, be aware when you're going out. And I remember thinking like, oh, really? Like, and he gave a bunch of scientific data about physiological differences between men and women. And I was like, dang it.
Yeah. Upper body strength and all of that. Yeah.
Even the strongest woman versus like the weakest group of men, it's still, still not in our favor. And it just highlights also even so many of the ideas, I would say all the ideas of feminism, can only exist in a vacuum that's been created, or not even a vacuum is not the right word, but it can only exist in a synthesized world that exists because it is so protected by things that the patriarchy has done. Like in the West, we have strong militaries that protect our countries, and we have great economies. It's not so great right now, but looking at the rest of the world, and looking at all of history, we are like the wealthiest, most technologically advanced position that we've been in as women. And it's only in that world that we can, come up with, the idea of Wonder Woman, for example, because you'll never see that in nature when natural law is like more obvious because there are less synthesized things because of technology and, all of that.
Yeah, our wealth definitely protects us. And I know that it's always interesting when there's natural disasters, like who is it that's out helping? It's usually not the women in the boats. There might be one or two exceptions, but by and large, it's, the Cajun Navy and, all of the very masculine ways of protecting and providing in those instances. And I think we'll probably see more of it, especially as I think human trafficking is one of those examples that's so tragic that we're going to see, there's an underclass of that going on in the world today. And I think sometimes it splashes out. I know there was just two young girls that were rescued from a hotel near my home, my hometown. And it was one of those amazing moments where you just realize how close everything is. And it's those kinds of things that where men have to be protective of women, where we're so vulnerable, especially teen women. And even the trans situation where you've got men in women's jails and men in girls' bathrooms, right? Yeah. All of those kinds of things, I think, are kind of crashing into the reality that we've created in terms of women having this kind of capacity to protect themselves in those instances.
Okay, so we're going to get into some of the ways that feminism has become like its own church or its own religion. and this flows very nicely from what we were just talking about, but the new idol being the autonomous self. Yeah. Can you flesh that out for us?
Flesh that out. Yeah. So there's a number of different pieces that feminism has adopted that, we go through, but you've got to start with what is it that's worshipped. And it's this idea of the autonomous self, that all of our energies are focused on that. Our independence, our careers, it's just very much even self-care, and my emotional health, and all of those things are there's a certain kind of like almost default narcissism that we've created in ourselves because of the fact that because we're so focused on self all the time, and that is not accidental. It's really this idea that that's what we need to be focused on, and that's where energies need to be, because that's where we're going to be happy. That's the big lie, is that this is what's going to allow us to become fully women. And of course, we've seen the fruits of that, which is people can't even define a woman now.
Yeah.
That's a key because it's so neutered. So that's really where it started. But this is the fascinating part, is to look at, and some of the other pieces that we can talk about, but just look at the role that feminism has come to play. And in Something Wicked, the argument is that feminism has created its own mega church, that it is really it's provided all these means through which people typically worship, and they order their lives, and they understand how all those pieces fit together, because it makes sense. It's all of a piece. And so the idol, the object of worship, unlike Christianity, is not God, it's really the self. And that's the starting point. So everything sort of feeds into that idea of how do we, protect ourselves in a way that we can remain autonomous and support ourselves, and, focus on that as a good.
And it's really revered like worship too. It's like, it's good that you're taking care of yourself. It's so good that you're, you got to love yourself first, like all of that. And then we totally miss out on connecting with others and with the richness that the messy parts of life bring.
Right, exactly. That all this, the beauty of things that come from vulnerability. I remember being on an airplane once, and someone, at that point I only had 4 children, but the man that I was sitting next to asked me if I had children or something. And I said, oh, yeah, I have 4. And he said, oh, well, that must be fun. Like very sarcastically. And it was one of those moments where I was like, I don't even know what to do with that. That's not even like a category I think of.
Like, that is fun.
Right. I know. But it just felt so out of place. But it's just that idea of entertaining ourselves and, pursuing travel and, all these things, that kind of this endless adolescence that we've gotten into because of that.
And back to the religion, megachurch cult-like elements of feminism. It's so striking because we were created for that. Like, we were created to live in community with the Lord and with one another, and to submit ourselves to that hierarchy, and to the messiness of it all, and the interpersonal dynamics. And as our culture has become more and more like godless, there's been a vacuum where people are looking for something to fill the place of religion in their lives. And feminism has been really ready to fill that. And this is just a thought that I had that I'm not even sure if this is correct, but I actually think that there is hierarchy in feminism. It's just that they've like turned it on its head. The hierarchy, I mean, it's like in the oppressor versus the oppressed. So the hierarchy is now just like, if you're, however many boxes you can check off, like if you're a blind lesbian female with one leg, like you're the most, you're the highest.
Yeah. Right.
No, hierarchy.
That's such a great way to put it. I think I really like that, because that's exactly it. It's just victimization has become laudable, and so the bigger the victim, the better, and that's exactly right. It is totally a pecking order. That's well said.
So even as they're like, smash the patriarchy and get rid of hierarchy, it's like, well,
but we mean a different hierarchy.
It's interesting because we're still ordering ourselves in this way. It's just
no, that's really
a really dysfunctional one.
Yeah, no, it's a great
instead of the
insight.
right one.
Yeah.
And
But I was just going to add on to that, because I think that's one of the insights about victimization is, it's such an unusual concept. But what it provides is it helps people figure out what the good is. Like, I mean, we watch this from week to week, like, okay, this week, this is the privileged class that we have to have the flag on our car for, or, this sign that we're promoting or whatever. It keeps changing. And I think it's because there's this vacuum of understanding what the good is, because we've gotten rid of biblical, the 10 Commandments. So this is how people know what it is that is good, is whatever those trends are. And we just kind of keep following it. But it's all a victimhood place. So it started with something good from Christianity, and then has been turned on its head because of the prioritization of that inverted hierarchy.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting.
That is super interesting. One of the things that I thought was really striking in your book, where you talk about the autonomous self, is the effect that it has on marriage. And I mean, even just logically, you're like, oh, that makes sense, because in Christian marriage, we know that we are supposed to be serving one another, like really seeking to outserve one another in gender specific ways. But I have a quote from your book here that is from Wendell. I hope I'm saying his name right.
Wendell Berry.
Wendell Berry, yes. So the end of it here, he says, marriage, in other words, has now taken the form of divorce, a prolonged and impassioned negotiation as to how things should be divided. During their understandably temporary association, the married couple will typically consume a large quantity of merchandise and a large portion of each other. I thought that, I was like, wow, that's so true in what we see in marriage today.
Yeah.
Because in the feminist world, you can't have true marriage.
Yeah, because there's always a reserve, something that you hold back because you're afraid of your vulnerability. And, this is the hardest part of fertility, is the kind of vulnerability that comes from it, not just in the immediate, but all those years. And so it's a matter of trying to protect oneself from that. And, that's the tragedy, is it's just the damage that it's done. Instead of two people 100% giving of themselves to one another, it has created exactly what Barry describes, just these two people that are kind of almost roommates that are always negotiating, and you do this and I'll do that, and we'll divide this up. And, but in the back of people's minds, there's still this, well, what if he leaves me? What if she leaves me? How do I protect myself against this? And, it's tragic versus the beauty of, what you described, but just that two people who have an aligned mission, that understand what they're doing is the building block of society. Yeah. They are, just doing something really incredible, something very hard and challenging, but that's where the beauty comes in, is in that capacity to really give of ourselves in a way, even when it's hard. Those
especially, I think, when it's hard.
Yeah.
It's a very sanctifying process.
Yeah. And transforming in good ways.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. I feel like so much of the marriage advice that I see on TikTok and Instagram, even Christian marriage advice, is trying to help people like you and Wendell are saying here to divvy up things and to keep score, really, in many ways. Right. And the only score that we should be keeping is like, obviously I'm not talking about in, dire situations where there's abuse and things like that. I'm talking about like in a normal marriage where you have normal, butting heads and all that kind of stuff. But the only score that you should be keeping is with yourself. Am I loving more than I did yesterday? Is, am I leaning into the Lord being my strength so I can love this person even more than they're loving me? Yeah. And you cannot do that with the feminist worldview.
No, and I think there's a certain, this is what marriage does as well, is it seasons us, it forces us to grow into better people. And I know even, with my first child, when she was born, I kept thinking, okay, next week's going to be easier. Next week's going to be easier. Next week's going to be easier. And finally I was like, the light bulb went on. It's not supposed to get easier. Yeah. Like, this is where I have to lose my ego, where I have to start letting go of all the things that I was and I think this is why motherhood is so hard, because you're losing the old identity. But what we don't hear is you're gaining a new one.
And it's so much better.
It's so much better. But I think that's why it's so challenging for so many women, because they don't realize there's something on the other side of it that's actually rich and tempered and mature and capable in a way that you were not when you give birth to that first child. There's so much, that you have to let go of. So I think that was, but once I realized like, oh, this isn't supposed to be easy, and I think we think about this in sports and things like that. Like the resistance and the challenges are good.
Yes, but
that's
a really great image.
We haven't translated that back into our the life of virtues in our own life. And I think that's really a key piece.
Yes. So many of us are still, I'm literally going to write a book about this at some point, but so many of us are still running from our suffering instead of allowing the Lord to refine us through it.
Yeah.
And, that is, it doesn't work out in the long term. It'll eventually find you.
Yeah.
But what's really sad to me about the autonomous self is that it's been pretty successful in creating that in women. And really another way to say the autonomous self is a lonely woman.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
She's just alone.
Right.
And I have so many friends who are in that situation where they're like in their mid-30s and they want to be married. And they're like, oh my gosh, like this is not happening.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about the mental health implications of that loneliness on women and children?
There's all kinds of pieces, I think, to this. I mean, I think the first thing is that woman is also saying, where are the good men? So we have to start there. Where have the good men gone? Well, what most people, especially women, don't realize is women were the first to change in the 1960s because we changed our sexual behavior. And instead of requiring men to rise to the occasion and be worthy of good women, we just made ourselves available through the pill, through promiscuity. Like this became the
no
new
accountability for men and
for anybody. And so that's really where the first change came from. And we haven't in any way we haven't scrutinized that at all. In fact, it's kind of it's tragic because instead of saying like this is actually not good for women and recognizing that and saying maybe you should not be so promiscuous, instead we just continue to do the opposite. Like, oh, well, men should change, or this should change, or we need more abortion, like whatever. It's tragic because we know that there's damage that happens to women. So it's sort of like saying, well, just children, you can go play with these knives. We're here for you. When you get all cut up, we'll stitch you up. Like it's so just true. A like ridiculous starting point that we just completely ignore from the beginning. And then we can't figure out why we can't get good men. Good women are required first, I think, which is, and that's sort of the irony too, is that we usually scrutinize men first before we scrutinize ourselves. We blame men for almost all of this for a very long time. So that's the first piece. The second piece, of course, is just the generational mental illness of children in particular who haven't been well attached to their mothers. And we see this. Erica Commissar has done amazing research on this, that, the crucial role that a mother plays in having a properly attached child. And when that does not happen, some of the mental illness that we see are seen particularly in the cluster B personality disorders, histrionics, narcissism, borderline disorder. Wow. All of those kinds of things are all, according to psychiatrists, which I'm certainly not one, but there's plenty of research out there, connected to attachment disorders that, grown women didn't have proper amount of affection as a child. And so that manifests itself in various ways. So there's that. Then, of course, there's just depression and anxiety that happen when you are alone. You're not grafted into a community. You're not grafted into, God and the spiritual life that are going to happen. And there's a woman named Hannah Spear who's a psychiatrist in Switzerland, and she talks a lot about how, she's got these women who have these different diagnoses, whether it's depression or anxiety and whatnot. And she says some of them, they've married a man who's sort of low on the neurotic scale, who's a good man. They get married and they have a child, and suddenly they're well. The problems are gone. So did they really have mental illness, or was it really just they needed to be loved? and they needed a purpose.
Wow.
So it's really interesting to look at these issues, because I think we gloss over them with pharmaceuticals instead of saying, like, maybe we should start encouraging women and men to get married and to be monogamous and to raise children in a loving environment, instead of really being focused on, like, wow, the feminist vision of you can work full time and then you need to be a full time mother. And if you can't do both, then someone else can take care of your child.
Yeah.
And this just continues to perpetuate the problem, because this kind of brokenness is sort of self-reinforcing and passed on. And this is how I actually think feminism evangelizes, is through this brokenness. It's its own category of spreading the faith, so to speak.
Yeah. And this is an observation I've made in some friends and acquaintances over the years with this too, is that a lot of them are not even in touch with how much that affected them not having their mom at home.
Mm-hmm.
And so now they're doing it too.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, well, my mom did it and I turned out fine. But then you get to know them more and you're like,
maybe not.
I don't think so. There's a lot of pain there.
Yeah.
And
right.
there's a lot of stuff in your relationship with your mom that needs to be worked on. There's a lot.
Right.
There's a lot of, and I think there's a lot of downstream things I could go into about how it affects femininity and all of those things. But
it's that modeling too. Like, we just don't have great examples of what motherhood really needs to look like, what a good mother looks like. We've got plenty of examples of, the mommy dearest, devouring mother, narcissistic, codependent, all those very bad examples of it, or sort of the negligent mother. But we don't have great examples of good mothers, like soulful mother, the mother that's well ordered, that's dialed into her children in a way that's healthy and, has its own boundaries and, all of that. So I think that's really one of the challenges, is to try and help give women a sense of what that actually is supposed to look like. And we don't have a lot of that right now.
No, there's not many tangibles that we can look at and go, that's it.
Right.
What are the 3 commandments of the feminist church?
So this is pretty detailed, so I'll try to keep it condensed a little bit. But obviously the Judeo-Christian tradition has the 10 commandments, but feminism has 3, and very purposefully 3. The first one is to have contempt for men. It's the patriarchy's fault. Let's get rid of the patriarchy. The second one is to be involved in the occult. And the third one is to be promiscuous. And what most people don't realize is these 3 things were all articulated back in the early 1810s. Early. Mary Wollstonecraft's son-in-law created who was Percy Bysshe Shelley. They never met because she died in childbirth when her daughter, Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, was born. But he wrote this poem, while Mary Shelley's writing Frankenstein, he's writing about this woman named Cythna, who was the embodiment of these 3 things, because Shelley took an idea from Wollstonecraft. He took an idea from her husband, who was William Godwin, who believed that monogamy was a kind of slavery and we needed to have promiscuity. And then he took his own interest in the occult and wrote them into this woman. So you might say this seems totally archaic. Like, what does this have to do with anything? Well, until you realize that every college young woman is encouraged to be involved in all of these 3 things. Yeah. Promiscuous, loathing men, and involved in the occult, having your tarot cards read, or horoscopes, or whatever, you name it. And the reason why there's those 3 is that each maps on to a different kind of break with the Trinity.
Wow.
So if you hate men, you're going to have a very hard time to understand God the Father.
Yeah.
If you are promiscuous, you're going to have a very hard time of understanding the Holy Spirit in your body as the holy temple of the Holy Spirit. If you're involved in the occult, you cannot. It's very challenging to understand and appreciate the authority of Christ as Lord and Savior.
Yeah.
So these are direct breaks that happen in feminism that make it incredibly challenging to get back then into Christianity, because they're so directed at the persons of the Trinity.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because it's like, again, it's like we have these God-shaped holes in our heart, and feminism is like, I'll just kind of fit in there.
Right.
But then there's something there. And
Yeah.
so it's hard to allow the Lord to come in and connect
Exactly.
when.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So I just kind of want to highlight one of the 3 commandments that sticks out the most to me because I have a son. And as I'm raising him, this is just what's at the forefront of my mind. Is like, how can I, as his mom, help protect him from the negative parts of feminism, or prepare him for a world where this is how people are thinking, maybe even about him. But talking about how and thou shalt hate men. One of the big things, I mean, I think Taylor Swift, I'm not a Swiftie, so I don't know. But I think she has a song called Smash the Patriarchy. And I mean, but that's like on t-shirts, and this the whole big thing. And that breaks my heart because I'm like, oh, this is like, you're really shouting like destroy men in many ways. And I would love to hear your thoughts about what patriarchy is, what it isn't.
So it's really interesting because you're the hierarchy that you were just talking about. Men are obviously at the very bottom of it. Their gifts are really just denied. You know, they're not needed with feminism in terms of men are called to procreate, provide, and to protect. Yeah. And if women are able to do all that on their own, then they usually they do become that bicycle that the fish needs. You know, Gloria Steinem has that great line about, or that ridiculous line, but it's appropriate here. You know, a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle, because that's the built-in ideology is this autonomy. And so men are totally denigrated, but they're also, you know, there's this weird dynamic of like, we want to be just like men, but we want you to become like us, like this weird, it's almost schizophrenic kind of relationship. Because we want to be so much like men, but we don't want you to be men, kind of thing. We don't want you to be like you. Yeah. So that dynamic is going on. The other thing that's interesting is, you know, because there's this weird inverted hierarchy, it's the remarkable thing is just the importance of a hierarchy and the role that it plays. This is the way in which men order society, and this is the way God has instituted it certainly through the church. We see it in the military. We see it actually, ironically, in corporate America, which women don't have any problem with being involved in that hierarchy.
It's okay to submit to that hierarchy.
We can submit to that one and
but not to your husband.
Yeah, make all kinds of demands on us and our time, but we can't do it to someone that we've chosen to marry. Yeah. So there's that. I think there's also just the role that, you know, trying to help men be men, and men, you know, have been very silenced by feminism. That's the remarkable thing. I'm learning more and more just how, you know, men appreciate the work that I'm doing in these books, because they're like, finally somebody's saying out loud what we're not really allowed to say. You know, just that incredible, it's like kryptonite, you know, for men. They do not want to talk about it. They don't want to engage with it, understandably, because it's usually just comes back to haunt them in one way.
Like a tar baby. It really is.
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy. So in any event, I think that the patriarchy has an incredible gifts, especially if you look at organization and the capacity that men have to honor everybody in that chain. You know, women usually are like, oh, you're not important to me, I don't need you. You know,
you're in or you're out.
Right. You're in or out, or it's very egalitarian. We all have to be at the same level. And if anybody's above me, watch out. You know, we'll mow you down, kind of thing. But men can say, oh no, we need you. You're going to go there, and we need you, and you're going to go there. It's a really powerful tool, just in terms of organization and practicality, and you know, all of that. And we certainly know that there's that element of the way God has ordained the world, and through the gifts that men have as well. So I think there's that's on the macro level. On the micro level, I think it's really important to just understand the role that men have in the family, because anytime you have a matriarchy, there are going to be limits in terms of its growth and its capacity to expand. And that's because women, by and large, generally are nurturers, and we like to hold things to ourselves, but we're also going to be a bit blind to the realities of our children and their needs in terms of leaving us or being outside of us. And again, everybody's slightly different, but this is a pattern that you see among women who are in matriarchies. What a man provides, though, in contrast to that, is the capacity to be more objective about the needs of the child and say, say, for example, even sexuality. This is something you need to hang on to and protect right now. Or say it's a job or a career. You need to get out of the house and go do that. Like, you have the capacity to do this. And this is why, especially for young men, those rites of passage are really important. This idea of a young man needs an older man to allow him to grow into his manhood and to understand that transition and to become a man. All those pieces are really important, and men have the capacity to do that. And this is one of the reasons why the family and the culture needs men to guide and lead those things that women sort of naturally don't observe and see and push for.
Yeah. And I think in my book, I come up with a term. I don't know if I created it. I never heard anybody say it, but I call it internalized feminism. And it's like a little feminist demon that sits on your shoulder and tries to make everything about how you're being oppressed as a woman.
Right.
And so some people, if they're,
it's Marx. It looks like Karl Marx.
Yeah, it looks like dressed as a woman.
Big beard.
Yeah.
He stinks. Dressed as a woman.
He's a trans Marx. Yeah, that I still have that from time to time, but I've decided to use it for good. And so instead of like following through what it's saying, I'll just be like, oh, that's what people might be thinking. And so how can we help like address that with truth? And so when people hear us talking about like the difference between a female strength and a male strength, they might be like, think that you're saying something denigrating about women, but you're not. It's just because we are so trained to value that masculine way of being. And we're also so the little feminists on the shoulder, the little Karl Marx on our shoulder. Every time we see any difference, we call it inequality.
Right.
Even though there needs to be that difference.
Yeah.
For complementarity and for having our strengths and our weaknesses covered by each other. And so when you're saying that, I know that you're not saying anything negative about women. You're pointing out something positive about men. But it's also good that we do that. It's also good, like you're talking about Erica Commissar's work, those beginning years, we need to do that. We need to hold our children in and nurture them and overprotect them and all of those things.
Right.
And then we need our husbands to step in and go, all right, time to make them fly the nest.
Yeah, exactly. That good balance. So, yeah, and I think that points out something really critical, which is that we haven't said anything good about motherhood in 50 years. If you look at media, promotion, magazines, it's very much been one-sided, that it's you have to be this kind of a woman. And it's very intentional that there's this dichotomy. The human brain loves binary options. So there's either the savvy woman who's the feminist, or there's the frumpy, overweight, not very smart, fundamentalist Christian woman. Like these are our options in the culture and the way it's presented. And this is why we have The Handmaid's Tale. That is an instantaneous message sender that whatever they're protesting is going to lead to a fertility cult. So that's it's amazing how effective that messaging is with just one red bad cape, and we as Christians haven't done a great job of combating that, of saying, okay, actually there's something really amazing about motherhood. There's something very vital and critical about it. And how do we portray that in a way that we give women sort of a new model to think about? And so curiously, while we have this kind of binary that's been created, the other thing that's fascinating to me is this idea that René Girard, he's a philosopher, he came up with this idea called the romantic lie. And he says, the romantic lie is the belief that all of our ideas are our own, that we come up with them. And that's kind of the amazing thing, is that, all these feminists think exactly the same way. And that if you ask them, they would all say, well, I'm very independent minded. You don't get to be both. No. You either follow the crowd or not. And so anyway, I think that's, one of the challenges that we really have is to start scrutinizing our own ideas. Like maybe this isn't actually what I think. And maybe I've been going along with these ideas in a way that's not really helping me or my goals in life and, what it is that I really believe this. So I think that's an important piece moving forward.
That's so interesting. Okay, so we're getting into the sacred right
Oh boy.
of feminism, which you say is work. And so I want to ask you how the Industrial Revolution is connected to that idea and how it contributed to the formation of this idea of work being the right, the sacred right.
Well, the interesting thing is just the problems that were created by the Industrial Revolution. Now, we obviously know there were incredible benefits, but the bigger issue was that what it did was transform the home. So the home had been kind of the locus of all activity. It was school took place there, husband's business, the family garden, everything was done there. Entertainment, hospitality, you name it. And then the Industrial Revolution comes along and that everything gets moved outside the home. So the home just becomes like a hotel, sort of a shell. And women felt that keenly, but it happened very slowly. So I don't think there was like whoa, look what's happening. And so feminism moved in at that moment and said, oh, you're unhappy because not because you've lost the home. It's you're unhappy because you're not like men. That was really what happened because of the vacuum. So feminism didn't have to happen this way. But as a result, because of the autonomous piece, work becomes essential because that's how an autonomous woman supports herself. She cannot be dependent upon anybody else. And so the work, therefore, becomes really vital. The career is the focus. And this takes the priority over, again, husband, children, marriage, all of that. It sort of is it's like the parachute or the escape hatch or something like that will always be there to sort of keep me invulnerable from ways in which I could be hurt or mistreated or whatnot. And in the past, of course, that vulnerability was covered not just by the husband, the larger community, the church community, the larger family. There were all sorts of other pieces that were involved in sort of couching that instead of it just being, maybe a government handout or something too. So it's you can see how important work is because of the fact that this is what allow women to maintain this sort of shell of impermeability, protection.
And one of the you mentioned psychologist Esther Harding in your book, and I thought it was really interesting. Her perspective about basically, she kind of says that women only know how to create how men create, and they're kind of emulating in that way. I'm not describing this well, but can you
talk about her?
Yeah, talk about that.
So Esther Harding is a Jungian psychiatrist that I had lunch with Jordan Peterson one day, and he recommended this book. And so in it, she talks a lot about this idea of, first of all, misplaced compassion. And Peterson talks about that idea too, but she gets to the heart of it. And she says, misplaced compassion is this idea that our love is so big and we feel so compassionate about things that it can fix everything. And that's sort of where it starts. And so Harding is one of the earliest women to recognize this pattern among 20th century women where we say, I want to save the world. Now, this is all over university marketing, and this is the Peace Corps, and all of that. Like, if I have these big, strong enough emotions, I can overcome this. Yeah. And so this is one of the first points that she talks about, which was amazing to me because she describes meeting a young woman who says this to her, like, I want to change the world. And Esther Harding in her book says, can you imagine saying that? Like, what a ridiculous thing. And then, of course, now you look, fast forward and you realize this is what everybody says. Well, what happened? And it was this idea that the strength of our emotions can go outside of ourselves, that we can fix people beyond ourselves, that we don't know, that like that's a much better place because we're not encumbered by the emotions, by what we have to do for them. Like, it's just very easy to sort of swoop in, fix things, take care of them, and go back to our apartment with our very entertained and lavish life. So it becomes like the woman who works at PETA, but she's aborting her own baby. It's that like totally misplaced. Where's the locus of her attention meant to be? It's meant to be on her baby, but because of the culture and this sense that women have of changing the world, we think it's got to be out there. It cannot possibly be close to me in terms of that. And so that was one of the insights. The other insight from Esther Harding is really this idea of integrating our personality into who we are. So we're not meant to just mimic men. We're meant to sort of go to this next stage of maturation, which is where the feminine of who we are is kind of on display. It's integrated into our personalities in such a way that we don't fit into a masculine ethos invisibly anymore, but that there's a feminine way in which we approach things because we've become integrated in our personality as far as a mature woman. So those are the insights that I think she really brings to us that I think are really important for us to start scrutinizing more and think about more deeply.
Yeah. And so that she calls that idea the woman's way of changing the world. Am I correct in that?
Mm-hmm.
I think that a group of women who I've seen this do really well, who are not biological mothers, but they're still mothers, is Catholic women in the religious life. So like Protestants would call them nuns. I know they're not all nuns. I don't really understand all the...
That's all right.
You know,
you don't just do it.
But we'll just say nuns for the sake of
right.
everybody watching. And just how somebody was so kind and sent my friend and I on a retreat with the Sisters of Life. And the way that they do their calling, their vocation, is as mothers. And so they're mothering, even though they are all have taken a vow of chastity and they'll, never have biological children. Yeah, but the way it's like the way that they do the work. So they're doing work, but they're doing it in a maternal way. And it was funny. I told one of them, I was like, I feel like I'm surrounded by Disney princesses right now. Like the way that they were their femininity was, in everything that they did, and in the love that they gave, and the way they communicated, and I thought that was really, really special to see such an example of like, okay, this is how we can bring our femininity into things even outside of biological motherhood.
And a lot of that, I love that example because I think it's really important because motherhood isn't just about biology. It's about the emotions, it's about mentoring, and it's about spiritual motherhood as well. And and what those women do is very local. They're helping local women who are in crisis pregnancies. They're helping women with children. They're, it's very hands-on kind of focus, subsidiarity, like closest problem ought to be fixed at the closest level kind of idea. But I think you're exactly right. When you are around a woman who has that capacity, where her ego is ordered and she's in a deep relationship with God, her emotions are also ordered as well, and her focus is not upon herself, and it then becomes this healthy relationship with other people that draws them out of themselves, that makes them become better. I mean, this is what motherhood is meant to do: is to bring out the best of someone else through that kind of focused love and intentionality. And it's, it's something very rich to be on the receiving end of, because you feel cared for. It's a really powerful, it's sad because it's such an unusual experience for us to have it, because we've so disordered women. But when you really understand what that is, maybe you have a great, a good, really amazing grandmother or someone in your life who understands that kind of loving, and there's something really special and very restorative about it, I think, when you experience it.
That's so true. Speaking of which, I have one of those grandmothers, and she really does remind me of that as well. It's very, very special. Okay, so kind of the final piece of how feminism resembles a megachurch and its own pseudo-religion is the gospel of discontent and the sacrament of abortion. Can you go into that for us?
Yeah, so these are two really big pieces. One of them is this idea of the gospel of discontent, and this was a term that was invented by the socialists back in the 1890s. And the socialists realized that if they made women angry, they would be more politically effective for them. Wow. And it works. Like, nobody wants to mess with an angry woman. It's just, and so they intentionally tried to stir up women's emotions with this idea of consciousness raising, which became very popular in the 70s and 80s in the United States, the 1970s and 80s. But the idea goes back to the early 1890s. And they would get women together and basically like just women would talk about the way they felt oppressed or what was wrong in their life or whatever. And it wasn't to like bring healing or anything. It was, the idea was so the women would be more angry, and not just about their own experience, but by the other women that were with them.
Wow.
So it was very intentional, emotional stirring up of women. And so that has continued. In fact, it went through China, and then it became in the 70s and 80s. People thought it was like this Asian Buddhist thing or something. I don't even know. They didn't even have any idea. It was really from this group called Lucifer, which ended up, that was the name of the journal. It ended up being rewritten. The journal was renamed the Journal of Eugenics. So it was all eugenics people. I mean, it's really like ugly stuff. But this is the amazing thing, is that they have such a grasp on our emotions, very intentionally. They're intentionally trying to make us mad. So if you look at a women's march, these are not peaceful women. These are not content women. That and that's the biggest tragedy, is they have zero idea how emotionally manipulated they have been by this, and very intentionally so. So that's a gospel of discontent, which has certainly replaced the gospel of Christ, and also even these emotions of faith, hope, and love. It's become contempt, envy, rage. Those are the pieces. And then the sacrament. Sacrament is something which is made holy. And as Catholics, every day in the Mass, there's their line. It's the Last Supper from Scripture. This is my body offered up for you. Jesus says this. And in the idea of abortion, it's the exact inversion of that. This is your body offered up for me. This transition. So abortion becomes required because of the fact that women have to work and they have to become like men. And so there becomes this internal battle with a woman and her body. And you hear this, women will say things like, my womb is a curse, and, I hate my fertility, or, what an inconvenience. And so you have this actual internal battle with the body. I mean, this is what's embodied in the trans movement, lopping off body parts and whatnot, because of the fact that this embodiment doesn't do what I want it to do, because I'm at war with who I am, and any kind of maternity and fertility. So, but it's necessary. And this is why, women have gone from being kind of fierce mama bears and wanting to protect their children to using that same kind of ferocity. And they now are using to protect the right to kill their children through abortion. And this is what, the heart of the problem with the women's vote is this issue that it's one idea, it's been reduced to sound bites, and it's stirred up with all of this hate, rage, and lack of understanding of what womanhood is. And those are all the things that are like this big mess that's been created, and it just keeps perpetuating itself because the brokenness continues. So
continues to break more people, so they continue to break more people. Right,
exactly. So and that's its own form of evangelization. So and you can see that. I mean, that's what a sacrament does. And in fact, there was an abortionist that just retired who did like late term abortions too in Colorado. In fact, I think one of his employees has just taken over his business. But prior to that, he actually spoke of it as a sacred calling. And it's so messy. It's just heartbreaking what we've gotten reduced to, that stage of we have to kill our own children in order to sort of keep this myth, this fairy tale of Wonder Woman alive.
Because in order to be autonomous, you need to be unencumbered.
Yep. And a child.
By children. And
exactly. Keep your options open. Oh.
So, I mean, this brings us to Christian feminism, which I feel like is just such an oxymoron in light of all that we've covered. Like,
right.
Yeah. But why do you think that so many Christians are set on melding these two?
Yeah. No, I think it's a great question. One of them, by and large, you see a lot of this desire to it's an identity. Feminism it's very in vogue. It feels like you're kind of part of the conversation if you can do that. And it's also this effort to like, let's build a bridge. We can bring you over here. And if we show that we're offering the olive branch of talking about feminism, the problem is that it hasn't worked that way. I mean, there might be some examples, but by and large, I know, especially among Catholics, Catholics abort and use contraception almost this exact same rate as a popular culture.
Wow.
Which tells you, both of which have never, the church has always said are prohibited. And there's very, very little difference. So it's clearly not working in that respect. That's one piece. Among Protestants, one of the things that's really interesting is to see that those who are espousing feminism are getting involved in the occult more readily. The Enneagrams and there's that kind of element, which is amazing because that goes obviously back to the early 1800s, and just that impulse is very much there. Yeah. So I think it's a lack of first of all, just calling out what it is, and people being more attached to the idea of it instead of, what they think could happen with it instead of what's really happening. Yeah. Those are part of the problem. The other issue is that as Christians, we haven't been really focused on how do we change the culture. And I think this is an important thing to realize. The culture has been destroyed because the left has used media against us. Because they don't have truth. So they have to use that which makes things appealing and visuals, TVs, movies, all of these things, social media now, they have to make in really compelling ways. But we've sort of relied on just truth, and we keep trying to make arguments instead of really getting engaged in the culture. And I think that that's something that is really important. This is why I've created a series of books called Theology of Home.
That's what I was thinking of. How
do we start giving people real models of what motherhood looks like in a healthy way instead of just, the devouring mother or whatever, the characterizations are generally made. And so I think we need to be more creative on that front, because when people see the truth and experience it, it's so much more compelling than what they're offering, but they just haven't been exposed to it. So I think I feel really strongly that that's a direction that we need to start going in, is sort of recrafting what motherhood really is and articulating it in ways that are compelling and, moving forward.
And when I considered myself a feminist, a lot of the time it was because the popular definition of the time, I think it probably still is equal, rights and protection for men and women.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, who wouldn't want that? Yeah, I'm a feminist. And that's why I think it's so important your work and what you're doing, because that's not what feminism is. Yeah. And it really can't be defined in a quick little cute sentence like that.
Or it's just helping women. Yeah. That's the other one people like to use.
Yes. And so even a lot of the Christians that I've encountered who consider themselves feminists don't really consider themselves feminists because they don't know it. They would say that they're feminists, but their definition of feminism is wrong. And so you're like, you don't really believe these things. So help you here.
And I think that's what's important, is just sort of uncomplicating it. Like just, this is one of the reasons why I wrote this book, is I'm just so tired of feeling like people thinking that these two things can fit together, when you realize the roots are diametrically opposed. One is about pride and control. The other one is about service and humility. One is about the worship of self. The other one is the worship of God. One is about the greatest, or about, controlling women. The other one has been the greatest source of women's dignity in all of human history. One is about killing children. The other one's about raising children. They do not match up when you really start seeing what it is that you mean by that. And so trying to then be like, well, we can recreate the word, or we can rebrand it, that's so much work. Why not just step away from it and go back to language and what you really mean? Yeah. Instead of, this loaded thing, like, what are you going to do? Change, like, be pro-family, so we'll just change mafia into something that's positive. Like, I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but it's that kind of like rebrand that seems foolish, because it's just so loaded already that it's just not even worth the effort. Like, let's come up with fresh, clean language that doesn't have all this baggage with it, and move forward so we can actually, focus on real things.
That's so good. Can you talk a little bit about the neuroscience of feminism?
Yeah, no, this is a really great question. And I have a whole chapter on this. It was so fun to write. I have recently discovered the work of Ian McGilchrist, who's a psychiatrist in England, and he wrote this book called The Master and His Emissary. And he did all this research on left hemisphere, right hemisphere brains. But he says, you have to throw out everything you know about those things or think you know about those things in order to really understand it. The brain works together, but there are different orientations that the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere have with each other. So the right hemisphere is supposed to really be in charge. That's the master. And that's really that's context. That's the big picture stuff. And I can get into more of what those things are in a second. But the emissary is the left hemisphere, which is more like fight or flight. It's more abstraction. It doesn't include context. It's meant to just serve the master. It doesn't have access to all the context and information that the right has. The other thing that's crazy about it is it's super confident. It thinks it knows everything. Like it doesn't have the capacity to question itself. So it just knows with this, kind of clarity that can be good if you're about ready to die, but it can be bad if you've gotten yourself, stuck in some kind of ideology. And that's sort of McGilchrist's point, is that our culture has moved more to where the left hemisphere is actually in charge, because we focused on the Enlightenment ideas of rationality and science, but it's led us to being very vulnerable to ideologies, because we can't we're just focused on the abstraction of it, and maybe even the goal that we think it's going to get us, but we don't realize there's a big gap between what we think is going to happen and what will actually happen. So think, for example, Soviet Union, those are two very different things.
Theory versus what actually
exactly
practically happened.
And then on the right hemisphere, of course, is just the richness of life. It's a purpose and meaning. It's context. It's wonder, processing of literature, all these amazing things. Relationships. All those things are there. So then the brain, when it's working together properly, obviously, there's a right order to it. But I think this is one of the things that I ended up reaching out to McGilchrist after I read his book 4 times and just said, okay, what do you think about this? And I actually, it was pretty funny because I dragged my feet for months before I could even ask him about it, because I was just like, oh, what if I'm wrong? And anyway, he got back to me very quickly and said, yes, I think feminism really maps onto this because it's this idea of abstracted equality where you're trying to make things equal that are not equal. And the mind the left hemisphere can't see the nuance. And so all it can do is start sort of cutting things off. It has to, for example, if you look at the law and instead of really understanding, and I'm not trying to talk about legal issues here, but just as an example, it has to make two things exactly alike, instead of really understanding women's bodies are different and it's going to require something else. It can't have that nuance. It's got to just make things identical, and that's how it functions. So anyway, there's all kinds of parts to this that was really fun to go into a whole chapter about it and really just describe what's going on. But I think one of the key pieces to it is this idea of humility. That's really one of the starting places of making sure that the right brain is really in charge and you're not stuck in this kind of ideological warp. And so this question of maybe I have this wrong. Maybe I haven't seen this properly. Maybe I'm missing something. Is really the place to start scrutinizing those ideas. And again, the romantic lie, we're being fed all kinds of things for reasons that are not noble and good, for us to believe, to sort of lock into ideologically. Maybe we need to start questioning them. So I think those are, McGilchrist offers this really great roadmap out of this ideology that we've been stuck in with these different things. Humor, something like that. Feminists are remarkably unfunny. There's no accident. It's not an accident that they're not funny because they don't have context. Yeah. And they're just so focused on this, these ideological pieces. So yeah, something like humor is a really great sign that you're in the right place. Those different ways. So I think it feels very human and healthy and ordered when you start looking at this from that, perspective of wonder and meaning and understanding God and relationships.
It's funny because the little Karl marks on your shoulder, feminist demon, it doesn't allow you. I mean, it really is playing into that left-right hemisphere thing, because it doesn't allow you to laugh at jokes because everything is about your oppression. So like that joke is at your expense,
Right.
And like that, everything is just reframed like that. And so really, we have lost humor and.
Right. And that's why the left can't make memes. The left's not funny, because it's very focused on the ideological pieces that are very abstracted. But it also has, this is one of the amazing things, is just that confidence piece of like, of course I'm right about this.
Yeah.
Like that's another element that's just
astonishing.
It is. Right. Yeah. So, especially when you look at politics and the way it's navigated. So anyway, I think the McGill-Kress conversation is so much bigger, but I think it really points to something with feminism that's really helpful to start breaking out of these ideological bonds that we've kind of tied ourselves up to.
And starting to heal from the effects of feminism.
Right. Imagine that.
Yeah, that's the next thing I wanted to ask you about, because people really need to just read the book. And in the last chapter, you start to paint a picture of what it looks like to heal and God's restoration of us from this feminist worldview. But what do you think the world looks like without feminism?
Yeah, it's really hard to imagine, isn't it?
It is.
I think one of the things that is probably the most striking that is I hadn't thought about until this friend of mine had written this piece about the idea that when a couple gets married, the man leaves his parents and he cleaves to this woman. Well, no man is going to cleave to that which is not steady and sturdy. And the expectation that he would is ridiculous. So it's really interesting to start thinking, like, what happens if we start giving women back their ordered emotions? What if we start giving them peace and presence and joy and focus, instead of like this constant sea of emotions all over the place and just this giant mess and focused on themselves? Like, this is, and actually I've heard this example used. I think Erica Commissar uses this example of like, what happens when there was some video recently where what happened when they reintroduced coyotes back into Yosemite or something like that. Like the whole ecosystem changes. And I think this is what happens if you start healing women. The whole ecosystem changes. Men change. Men can trust and love their wives and use their gifts. Children change because they're suddenly loved and acknowledged and given their childhood and without all that destruction. Now, obviously, we're not utopian, but these are the things that can actually happen instead of constantly being stymied or locked up against them because the right pieces aren't there. So I think the other thing that happens too is just even like we were mentioning earlier, language can be restored, and we can talk about things in fuller terms instead of these weird illogical sound bites that might mean something different for different people, and everybody's kind of got their own read on things. So anyway, I think it's, in a lot of respects, it's this restoration of something really beautiful and compelling, and that I think people are starving for. I think there's just even all the crisis of loneliness that we have. Much of that is because women are busy and focused, and they don't have the capacity to arrange social events the way that they used to and be responsible for that. Like, that was just sort of part and parcel of the culture. And we've gotten away from that because we don't focus on those human elements that are, somewhat invisible, but feel very powerful when they're gone, that we miss them. This is the source of loneliness. So anyway, I think there's so much to think about what could potentially happen. And it's very exciting because it just feels like so much of it will just be positive, that it's not, I think we've gotten to the point where we understand women have incredible capacities and gifts and abilities, and often and are called to use them in different ways. But we also understand that women have different seasons. We have different seasons of lives, different callings, different ways in which they can engage the world. So really respecting that at this stage, it feels like, something that's important and well earned as well.
And I think men and women are both so hungry for a sense of fulfillment in life, because that's one of the things that I think we've lost through all of this. And So I just imagine like how incredible it would be
Yeah.
for men and women to feel fulfilled. And part of that I think is understanding our complementarity, understanding that where I'm weak, he's strong, and where he's weak, I'm strong. And having that sense of purpose of mattering in your family and mattering in your community, that we need to be connected back to again.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And just that sense of mission of facing
Yes.
things together instead of facing each other, and really eliminating that totally unnecessary battle of the sexes. Like that, so much of
Yes.
that has been stirred up intentionally when in fact that complementarity is just so vital.
Yes. Okay, well, I want to close with reading a quote from your book that I just thought summarized everything so beautifully. Women's lives aren't meant to be sterile abstractions to perform far-off mercies for strangers while exacting the perfect division of home labor with our spouses. They're meant to be messy and sublime, varied and banal, heartrending and elevating, awkward and awesome, textured and streamlined, contained and surrendered, all rooted in the concrete, the tedious, and the everyday. When we order our mind, our loves, and our lives rightly, this is where the real fireworks of the heart and soul get their spark. Only then can life brim over with the things for which the human heart longs: meaning, melody, religious awe, mirth, popped corks, belly laughs, bonfires, fairy tales, poetry, wit, wonder, and connection. I think that's like the best, I don't know, statement on being a woman that I've read. I'm like, this is so good.
Yeah.
It's so, and the whole thing is just phenomenal.
Thank you.
Where can people find your work? Because they're gonna want more after this.
Well, something wicked, the best place to get it is Sophia Press.
Okay.
Sophia Institute Press. But also I have a blog, theologyofhome.com, which is probably the best way to follow me. I post 5 days a week there. And then I've got a personal blog or a personal website, just carriegress.com too. So,
I'll link it all below.
That's great.
And
Yeah.
you're on,
I'm on Instagram.
You're on Instagram?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was like, I think that's it because I follow you there.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm on Facebook, but I don't like Facebook, so I spend very little time there. So yeah.
Yep. I use it for like Facebook groups to ask very specific mom questions about things, and that's it. Well, thank you so much for this interview, for sharing your wisdom with us. And even bigger, overarching thank you for just being faithful to the Lord and the call that He's put on your life. And I'm gonna cry. I'm gonna hold back because I'm just so thankful. Like I know that I needed your work in order to become the woman that God has for me to become, and He's still forming in me. And I know so many women feel the same way and are going to be exposed to your work and experience that. And so I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much.
You got me crying.
We're all going to be crying. This morning I was like, I gotta wear my waterproof mascara. I just have a feeling. And guys, thank you so much for watching today's episode. And you can leave your comments down below. If you like this episode, it really helps. Subscribe, all the things. Share it with a woman in your life. And we'll be back in 2 weeks with our next episode.